Hello everyone, welcome everyone to the channel Strange Night Podcast. Story 1. The Vanished Perfect Wife. The Susan Powell Case. Our story opens in December 2009 in West Valley City, Utah, the home of the Powell family. Susan Powell, a bright, beautiful young woman, was a devoted wife and mother to their two young sons, Charlie, age 4, and Braden, age 2. Her life, though seemingly ordinary, was overshadowed by the control and obsession of her husband, Josh Powell. Josh Powell, a man with a quiet exterior, harbored a deep, dark side, fueled by intense jealousy and underlying abuse. He constantly monitored and restricted Susan's social interactions, especially with her own family. Their relationship had deteriorated to the point where Susan had begun planning for divorce and had written a document detailing Josh's emotional abuse and terrifying control. On the morning of December 7th, 2009, Susan Powell vanished. Josh was the only one home with her and the two boys the night before. When the police arrived, Josh calmly spun a bizarre tale. He claimed that in the middle of the night, he decided to take his two sons camping in the desolate, cold desert. When he returned, Susan was gone. He asserted that she must have left on her own and had locked the door from the outside. The contradictions in Josh's testimony began to mount. Police found his minivan was still ice cold, suggesting the camping trip was a fabrication. Witnesses reported that Josh had meticulously cleaned his vehicle upon his return. More chillingly, the young boys, Charlie and Braden, offered innocent yet haunting statements. Charlie mentioned that his mother had gone with angels, and Braden said his mother was in the trunk of the car. Though Susan's body was never found, investigators were convinced that Josh Powell had murdered his wife the night she disappeared. However, there was insufficient direct evidence to charge him, and Josh was released, moving in with his father, Stephen Powell, another highly strange individual. The tragedy did not end there. Susan was gone, but her two sons were alive, potential witnesses, and victims of psychological manipulation by Josh and his father. After a period, Child Protective Services were forced to remove the boys from Josh's care. The final and most heartbreaking climax occurred in February 2012. After a court ruled to permanently deny Josh custody of his sons, he fell into despair and rage. Josh locked the doors of his rental house, violently attacked Charlie and Braden with an axe, and then set the house ablaze, ending all three lives in one final act of pure destruction. The Susan Powell case is a double nightmare: the mysterious disappearance of the mother and the brutal death of her two young sons at the hands of their own father. It exposes the dangers of jealousy, sick control, and the failure of protective systems when facing a calculating killer. While Josh Powell ultimately took his own life, the truth about Susan remains a mystery. A perfect wife who vanished into the darkness due to the crime of the man she trusted most. Story 2. The Christmas Eve Tragedy. The Shocking Fahey Case. This story takes place in a tranquil suburb of Ireland in 2005, but the timing of the crime made it one of the most haunting tragedies in the country's criminal history. Christmas Eve, a night when the world should be filled with light, laughter, and family warmth, it became the final night of horror for Catherine Fahey. Catherine was a vibrant young woman, married to Dermot Fahey. Their marriage from the outside seemed stable, but internally, it was being consumed by Dermot's devastating psychological ailment, pathological jealousy. He was a husband perpetually suspicious, controlling, and deeply insecure about his place in Catherine's life. Every relationship, every glance, every smile Catherine gave to another was interpreted by Dermot as a betrayal. The tension had accumulated for months, but on that fateful Christmas Eve, it reached its breaking point. Perhaps it was a congratulatory phone call from a colleague, a harmless compliment, or a minor argument about holiday preparations. No matter how small the trigger, it was the final straw for Dermot's distorted mind. In a fit of insane rage, Dermot Fahey lost all control. He brutally attacked Catherine right inside their festively decorated home. It was a savage act of murder, driven by accumulated hatred and resentment, no longer a simple moment of anger. Catherine Fahey died at the hands of the husband she trusted on the night she should have been safest. After committing the crime, Dermot did not immediately call the police. He attempted to stage the scene. He fabricated a false story, trying to cover up the crime with deceit and a shocking calmness. He even interacted with neighbors, playing the role of a worried or grieving husband. The contrast between the festive joy outside and the blood-chilling scene inside the house created a truly horrific image. However, the deception could not last. Police quickly found holes in Dermot's account. The absurdity of some details and forensic evidence swiftly exposed his crime. When the truth was revealed, the Irish community was shocked and terrified. A tragedy had occurred on the most sacred of nights, destroying not only a family, but the spirit of a neighborhood. The Dermot Fahey case is a horror story of ultimate betrayal. It serves as a warning that the most intimate relationships can also be the most dangerous places, when jealousy and control turn into deadly weapons. Catherine Fahey's death forever remains a stain on the warmth of Christmas Eve, reminding us of the dormant demons within the human soul. Story 3. The Brutal Brother. The Bloody Inheritance Case. This story takes place within the high society of a major French city, centered around a wealthy family that owned a long-established business empire. Following the death of the father, 2 brothers inherited a massive fortune and the right to manage the company. From the outside, they were partners in success, but internally, their relationship had been consumed by jealousy, resentment, and bottomless greed. The elder brother, always feeling inferior or unjustly treated in the division of assets, harbored a deep-seated hatred for his more successful and respected younger sibling. He believed that only with the younger brother's disappearance could he gain sole control of all the power and wealth, finally satisfying his desperate need for validation. The murder plot was meticulously crafted by the older brother, characterized by cold calculation. This was not a crime of passion committed in the heat of the moment, but a carefully considered act to eliminate an obstacle. He chose a discreet method, perhaps slow poisoning or an assassination expertly staged to look like a sudden accident or a health crisis. The incident occurred at one of the family's luxurious properties. The younger brother suddenly passed away under suspicious circumstances. Initially, the police and family suspected a tragic accident. The older brother played the role of the grieving sibling, taking over the company's operations with a flawless public appearance and swiftly pushing through the inheritance procedures. However, the truth always leaves cracks. Small details in the older brother's testimony, his noticeable lack of genuine emotion, and the sudden haste in his financial decisions attracted the attention of a sharp detective. They began to delve deeper into the tense relationship between the 2 brothers. Forensic evidence and toxicology analysis ultimately exposed the horrifying truth. The younger brother's death was not accidental. It was murder. This crime shocked France, not only because it occurred within a distinguished family, but also because of the brutal motive. The older brother violated the vow of blood, ending his brother's life purely for money and power. This case is a horror story of human depravity, proving that greed can turn a brother into a cold-blooded devil, willing to destroy his closest relative to achieve personal gain. Envy killed kinship. Story 4. The Demon in Disguise. The Dennis Nilsen serial killer case. This story takes us to London between 1978 and 1983, a period when the city was haunted by a predator perfectly hidden within society. Dennis Nilsen, our central figure, was not a social outcast. He was an ordinary civil servant, a former military police officer, a quiet man living in apartments in Muswell Hill and Cranley Gardens. It was this very veneer of normalcy that concealed a brutal serial killer. Nilsen hunted his victims, mostly young, homeless, or gay men, individuals who were vulnerable and whose disappearance would be less likely to be reported. He would often invite them to his home, offering them a place to sleep or a meal, creating a false sense of security. Once the victims were lured in, Nilsen would commit his crimes. He typically killed them by strangulation or drowning them in the bathtub. The most horrific aspect of Nilsen was not the act of murder itself, but what he did afterward. He kept the bodies for weeks, sometimes months, talking to them, bathing them, treating them as companions in his sick loneliness. He transformed his home into a private morgue and pathological laboratory, an unimaginable fact in the heart of the UK capital. When he began to find it difficult to conceal the bodies, Nilsen resorted to horrific methods of disposal. He dismembered the bodies, attempting to burn them in the garden or flush them down the toilet. It was this final act that led to his downfall. In February 1983, Nilsen's neighbors reported blockages in the drains, leading to the discovery of tissue and bone fragments. When the plumber investigated, they found strange matter of human origin. Police were called, and when they questioned Nilsen, he confessed to his crimes with chilling composure. He even voluntarily listed the names of the victims he could still recall. The Dennis Nilsen case was shocking, not only for the number of victims, but for his utter coldness and calculation. He was a demon in human form, living proof that the most dangerous sociopaths can live right next door, perfectly integrated into daily life. Nilsen's crimes form a dark chapter about loneliness, the desire for control, and the ultimate destruction of humanity. Story 5. The Rebellion in the Darkness. Patricide and Matricide on the West Coast. This story takes place in a wealthy, secluded neighborhood on the west coast of the United States, where luxurious homes conceal the deep spiritual tragedy. The family we are discussing had everything: money, status, and a son who was expected to continue their glorious legacy. However, it was these immense expectations and tight control that created a suffocating environment where the son felt like a prisoner. His parents, obsessed with success and public image, imposed a rigid academic and life schedule, stripping their child of all personal freedom. To them, their son was an investment, an extension of the family's reputation. To the son, that control was a chain he desperately needed to break. The resentment, anger, and sense of desperation festered for years, growing into a cold, calculated hatred. He began to dream of a life without control, a life that could be bought with his inheritance. The idea of killing his parents was not an impulsive act, but a calculated plan, a final, violent rebellion. The son sought external help, perhaps from friends or a lover, whom he convinced that this crime was the only path to liberation. The plot was detailed, aiming to stage a failed robbery homicide or a random home invasion. On the night of the tragedy, the son, along with his accomplice, carried out the murder of his parents. This act was not just homicide. It was a violent release from all the pressures and suffocation. The crime scene was a horrific sight, but the perpetrator tried to erase the traces and create a perfect false narrative. Initially, the police leaned toward the robbery theory. However, the son's suspicious indifference and noticeable lack of grief, coupled with his haste in accessing the inheritance, prompted investigators to reconsider. Intense interrogations and collected evidence quickly exposed the web of deceit. This case was shocking, not only for its brutality, but because it exposed a dark underbelly of the American dream, the pressure for success, and the perfect image that bred monsters inside affluent homes. It is a horror story about the destruction of a family under the weight of expectation and control, where parental love was twisted into tyranny and freedom was bought with the blood of his own kin. Story 6. The secret behind the smile. The shattered friendship case. This story takes place in a major Australian city, focusing on two young women who were inseparable best friends since childhood. They shared every secret, every life milestone, and even started a small business together. However, as one began to achieve greater success in both her career and personal life, securing a stable romantic relationship, building a bright future, the other became trapped in resentment and a feeling of failure. Envy began to creep into the heart of the friend, turning into a silent and toxic hatred. The success of her best friend was no longer a source of joy, but a painful reminder of her own shortcomings. This jealousy consumed the perpetrator's soul, creating a psychological perversion, the need to destroy the source of her torment. The murder plot was carefully and cruelly devised. The perpetrator leveraged the victim's absolute trust. He or she accessed the victim in a private moment, likely at home, where the victim felt completely safe. The crime was executed coldly, followed by a sophisticated attempt to cover up the truth. The killer tried to stage the scene as a suicide or an accidental death, using intimate knowledge of the victim's habits and private life to make the false narrative believable. Afterward, the perpetrator appeared before the public and the victim's family with a grieving facade, playing the role of the best friend, enduring a tremendous loss. However, as always, the deception could not conceal the truth. The lack of genuine emotion, the killer's overly keen interest in the victim's personal belongings, and an excessively detailed knowledge of the death raised suspicion among investigators. The police began to dig into this seemingly perfect friendship, uncovering evidence of underlying jealousy and hidden arguments. This case shocked Australia because it was a clear example of how envy can turn a best friend into the most savage enemy. It is a horror story about the betrayal of absolute trust, where a relationship built on sharing became the very means for carrying out a brutal crime. The secret behind that friendly smile was a deadly hatred that forever destroyed the meaning of friendship. Story 7. The Wicked Mother. The Diane Downs Case. This story takes us to Oregon, USA, in May 1983. Diane Downs, a young mother, drove frantically to the hospital, claiming that she and her 3 children had been attacked by a stranger on a desolate country road. Her daughter, Cheryl, age 7, was deceased. Her 2 remaining children, Christy, age 8, and Danny, age 3, were critically injured. However, Diane's story immediately contained inconsistencies. She was suspiciously calm after witnessing her daughter's death and her 2 remaining children nearing death. Her cold demeanor and bizarre behavior in the hospital, including flirting with a detective and offering to help him solve the case, raised deep suspicions among investigators. As police delved deeper, the horrifying truth gradually emerged. The attack was not carried out by any stranger. Diane Downs herself was the perpetrator. Her motive was even more shocking than any initial speculation. Diane was having an affair with a married man who did not want children in his life. To eliminate the obstacles to her relationship, Diane Downs planned to murder her own 3 children. She shot them with a gun, then shot herself in the arm to stage the scene. She was willing to abandon her motherhood and sacrifice her own flesh and blood merely for a man. During the investigation, Christy, the 8-year-old daughter who miraculously survived the critical injuries, became the key witness. Despite severe psychological and physical trauma, Christy bravely testified against her mother. She recounted that her mother herself had shot them. Christy's testimony tore down Diane's wall of deceit. The Diane Downs case shocked America, becoming a symbol of ultimate depravity and selfishness. It was not just a crime of murder, but a blatant betrayal of the most basic survival instinct and the sacred bond of motherhood. Dee Downs was sentenced to life in prison. This story is a horrifying reminder that personal egoism and lust can transform a mother into a cold-blooded monster. The fake smile of Diane Downs, who was willing to trade her children's lives for a fleeting relationship, forever remains a haunting image of the wicked mother in true crime history. Story 8. The Abandoned Wife Massacre, the Canada Case. This story takes place in a small Canadian town, where a seemingly private divorce turned into a horrific massacre. The victim was the wife, who bravely decided to end a marriage filled with violence and control. The husband, the perpetrator, simply could not accept this rejection. The husband, a man with an ordinary facade yet driven by possessiveness and a wounded ego, viewed his wife not just as a partner, but as personal property. To him, her decision to divorce was not merely a betrayal, but an unacceptable humiliation. He could not tolerate the thought that she would find happiness and freedom without him. Rage and a desire for revenge consumed the husband's mind. He began to plan the murder with cold calculation. This was an act driven by jealousy, intense anger, and the need for absolute control, even after the relationship was over. The massacre occurred after the wife had officially filed for divorce. The husband accessed her in a private moment, possibly at her home or workplace. He carried out the attack brutally and mercilessly. This act was intended not only to end her life, but to serve as a final message of his dominance. After murdering his wife, the husband attempted to cover up the crime. However, in cases of domestic violence fueled by strong emotions, evidence often leads easily to the perpetrator. The police quickly focused on the husband, noting his lack of genuine grief and the inconsistencies in his statements. The investigation uncovered not only the horrific crime, but also the history of prolonged violence and control within the marriage. This case shocked Canada, sparking widespread debate about intimate partner violence and the dangers of seeking separation from toxic relationships. The Abandoned Wife Massacre is a chilling horror story about revenge and rejection. It serves as a grim reminder that for some controlling individuals, the end of a relationship is not a separation, but an act of destruction. The wife sought freedom, but the price she paid was her own life. Story 9. The Killer on the Boulevard, the BTK Serial Killer Case. This story takes us to Wichita, Kansas, a seemingly ordinary American city where, from 1974 to 1991, a serial killer unleashed absolute terror. This perpetrator called himself BTK, an acronym for Bind, Torture, Kill. What made BTK especially chilling was not just the brutality of his murders, but his ability to integrate perfectly into community life. His real name was Dennis Rader, a man with a conventional appearance, an Air Force veteran, an animal control officer, the devoted husband, a father of two, and even an active church congregation president. Rader committed a total of 10 murders. His modus operandi was to break into victims' homes, restrain them, torture them for a period, and then end their lives. His motive was not money or jealousy, but the morbid satisfaction derived from controlling and dominating the victim's fear. Throughout his active period, Rader frequently sent letters to the police and the media. These letters contained detailed confessions, hints about his next victim, and explicit challenges. He craved recognition and wanted to control his own horror story. This only intensified the fear and despair of the community, as they knew the killer was living right in their midst. For many years, the BTK case remained cold. The police had profiles and evidence, but they could not find the killer who was hiding too perfectly. Dennis Rader lived a double life, maintaining the facade of a model citizen while concealing a cold-blooded predator. His downfall came in 2004, after a decade of silence. Rader resumed contact with the media, and this time, he made a fatal mistake. He asked the police if it would be safe to send information via a computer floppy disk. The police, through a public notice, replied that it would be safe. Rader sent a disk, and through metadata, investigators were able to trace that it was last used at Dennis Rader's church and saved under the name Dennis. DNA evidence collected from Rader's property confirmed his identity. This truth shocked the entire Wichita community. They could not believe that their friendly neighbor, who held a position on the church council, was the demon who had spread terror for over 30 years. The BTK case is a horror story of persistent deception and pure perversion. It serves as a grim reminder that the most dangerous killers may not be strangers lurking in the shadows, but the people we see every day who have completely mastered the art of living in two separate worlds. Story 10. Undercurrents of hatred. The daughter who killed her parents for money. This final story takes us to a quiet, seemingly idyllic town in Germany, where a family appeared to live a comfortable and problem-free life. The victims were the father and mother, who had worked hard to provide their daughter with a good life. However, this daughter, who enjoyed all the benefits, harbored a deep-seated resentment and an insatiable desire for material wealth. The daughter, along with her lover, was tired of waiting. They didn't want to build a career slowly. They wanted immediate wealth. In their minds, her parents were the only obstacle between them and a life of effortless luxury. The family assets and life insurance policies became their sole target. This was a crime driven entirely by cold-blooded greed. The daughter and her lover planned the murder meticulously, leaving no trace of emotion or remorse. The plan was to brutally murder the parents and then stage the scene as a break-in or an accident. On the night of the tragedy, the quiet house was stained with blood. The crime was carried out savagely. Afterward, the couple attempted to create an alibi and performed a public show of grief. They cried, lamented the loss, and tried to expedite the process of inheriting the assets. However, the daughter's chilling composure and strange behavior quickly caught the attention of German police. Investigators noted her lack of genuine sadness and her over-preoccupation with financial matters immediately following her parents' death. Through deeper investigation, police uncovered secret communications between the daughter and her lover, along with evidence of outstanding debts and discussions about how they would spend the inheritance money. This evidence exposed their entire ruthless plan. This case shocked Germany due to its brazen nature and the purely financial motive. It is a horror story about moral decay, where familial love was valued less than temporary luxury. The daughter treated her parents as disposable assets. Undercurrents of hatred provides a chilling conclusion to our series. It serves as a warning that evil may not require complex reasoning. Sometimes, it only needs bottomless greed and absolute selfishness. This story will forever be a reminder that money can turn the closest loved ones into the most brutal enemies.